Welcome to BAMM-IT with John Michael and Mari, covering all things business, accounting, management, marketing, and IT, the place where businesses and entrepreneurs find the forest through the trees.
Welcome to BAMM-IT. I am John Michael Kledis, and my good sidekick here,
Mari Peterson with Marketing Outpost.
And I am with Peridot Consulting. Today is our final episode of Season 1. I'm sad. We're going to be talking...
Yay! If I could, I would add the sound effects, cheering, clapping.
Well, that's only because you're the one that has to edit out all my ums and ahs, of which we can get to that in a little bit. But we are wrapping up Season 1 today with episodes, and we're going to be starting Season 2 here later in the summer, and we'll announce the date when we have that zeroed down. We're just going to give ourselves a little break.
There you go with that
I didn't hear. I've never heard any podcast that I've listened to. I've never heard my ums.
You mean your ears literally filter out all your ums?
No, it was a joke because you go in and edit them out. That was my joke. Mari edits out all my ums, so when I re-listen to the podcast, I've never heard them, so I didn't know I had a problem.
Exactly. Saving you from yourself.
So we today we just want to kind of recap Season 1 of BAMM-IT, but also just talk about what we've learned and about podcasting. If anybody out there is thinking about doing it, kind of our learning process through it. Did I again?
You ummed again.
I'm being very conscious of my ums, and it doesn't. I'm not doing a good job at it.
I think now that you're thinking about them, you're saying them even more.
Probably. So let's start at the beginning. How did we decide to do BAMM-IT? Where did we?
I believe that you suggested it.
Yeah, I said we should do a podcast, Maury.
You did. We've been working a lot together on our your roundtable workshops, which combines the business and accounting with the marketing. It just seemed like there were so many topics covered, and we do so much to help our small business clients that reaching them in a new medium seemed like the logical thing to do. Mm-hmm. As a marketing person myself, I usually recommend podcasts, but I had not started one myself. So part of this was also the exercise of creating a podcast, seeing what is actually involved, so that should I decide to recommend this to anybody else, I can be very realistic about what the expectations are.
And I listen to podcasts, and I've listened to some that were in this genre, and I was thinking, Mari and I could do just as good or better at that, and it could be fun. It could be a fun adventure, and I always like doing new things, harboring curiosity, expanding your experiences. So I was very excited about this possibility, and I was humbled that Mari said okay. Kind of brought it up as an idea, and she was just going to shoo me out the door, but she actually embraced it.
Well, those things where if you only knew then what you know now, you might not have done that. So this is kind of one of those things, but I actually do not regret it. I've learned a lot. It has done exactly what I wanted it to do, which was the first half, which is, I think, provide some valuable information to people out there listening that they can actually walk away with something they can use. And number two, it did give me a very realistic view of what is involved with podcasting.
And the good news is that overall we've liked it. We've enjoyed it. We're going to continue it. We're going to continue it as Season 2. We decided to end Season 1 to give Mari a break from all the ums in my editing. When we started this, I took a small internet class on podcasting, and out of that I learned some things like getting the music, getting the hard intro that we do with that voiceover, and
I will say that was very important because John Michael took the time to figure out the ABCs of getting it started. Otherwise I might not have ever gotten it started. I think it does take two people to kind of take the burden off and share the burden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I figured out in a podcast you do want to have what they call a hard intro, which is the music, the lead-in, that hard dub. That's every episode has that same hard intro that's pre-recorded, and then you have what they call a soft intro, but it's the same outline. And in our soft intro, we say "Welcome to BAMM-IT." We introduce ourselves. We tell you who it's brought by, and if you have any sponsors, it can be brought by that sponsors. In this case, we sponsored it ourselves, so it was brought by Peridot and Marketing Outpost. And then you mention what you're going to be talking about, and we decided to introduce like a fun little lead-in. That fun little lead-in was the interesting facts. What's your interesting fact on the topic today? And that's a fun little lead-in to going into what we're talking about.
So what's our interesting fact for this wrap-up season?
So the interesting fact on podcasts. My interesting fact is just that there's about 700,000 podcasts out there. It's just a large number. They're calling this kind of the podcast revolution right now because there's just more and more podcasts popping up. The barrier to entry is becoming smoother for the most part than it used to be.
I also believe it relates to sort of our last episode where we talked about OTT, over the top advertising, which really is a change in how people are watching TV, is also a change in how people are accessing entertainment. So podcasts are getting more, I think, popular because you can listen to them in the car. If you're at the gym, you can listen to it on your phone while you're working out. If you're going for a jog or a walk or whatever. So I believe that now we've become so accustomed to carrying our devices around with us, and we have so much time where kind of really don't have anything to do, or we're waiting in line somewhere or whatever it is, that we can now listen to something that we choose, not just what is on the radio.
Well, and podcasts are very educational. They're very in-depth. And
some of them are entertaining.
Some I've heard that maybe some of them might be. I don't know.
Do you ever listen to any of them that are entertaining?
Everyone I've listened to is entertaining, and this one, believe it or not, I even get entertained by. I actually listen to Art BAMM-IT over again, and I'm entertained listening to.
Apparently, podcasts cover almost every kind of subject out there. There's even podcasts on knitting and wrestling and things like that you wouldn't normally think of. But if there's an interest out there and a group of people interested, then somebody has created a podcast about it.
Could you imagine talking about knitting?
No, I can't. But then that would be so interesting as to what the heck do you create a whole podcast series about knitting? Like
different thread techniques, but you wouldn't have to see it? How would you explain that? In a I don't want to digress.
Well, that would be the interesting part, but one of the fastest growing businesses in our area is actually this whole knitting group.
Really?
Yeah. So anyway, my interesting fact, which is actually leading to a kudos to us, John Michael, is that a lot of podcasts, they call it pod fade. It's a term, pod fade. And what it means is when people stop creating podcasts. So basically, a lot of people start podcasts. It's easy to start. Like you said, the barriers to entry now are pretty minimal. But actually maintaining the podcast for any length of time is what's difficult. So when do you think a lot of podcasts experience pod fade, meaning they just quit creating new episodes?
Just kind of burn out. Around episode 20.
Well, you're wrong. Around episode 7.
7? Wow.
So we have actually went through almost 30 episodes by the time we do this wrap-up episode. And we've been going at it since January?
Well, before then, but that we released in January.
Right. So we've been going at it for 6 months almost. And we created our whole first season. So I'm proud of us. Kudos to us.
Yeah, we did good. And there's kudos to you. There's keeping the content, keeping it fresh can be taxing, but we made a point. We were very consistent. We said we're going to release an episode every Monday, and we did. And we had the content there. We had the outlines in place.
So let's talk about that more. If you're going to create a podcast, how do you create a successful one where you do not experience pod fade?
Yeah, so you need to have a consistent release date. Just don't willy-nilly put it out, because you're going to want to be able to have expectations as to when your podcast is going to come out. You want to have
And I think on that note, I'd
up.
like to add that we kept each other accountable. So there were times when I really just was like, I do not have time to record a podcast. And if it had been left up to me and I had to make a choice, I probably would not have recorded it. But because I had to be accountable to John Michael, and we had set up the recording time, so we put it on our calendar every other Friday. We would record 2 episodes, no matter what. And that was very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I also believe that accountability helped us to keep on track, and then it also helped some of that burden, don't you think?
Yeah, and something to keep in mind is we recorded this through my tax season, which is just a burden, and Mari's extremely busy herself, and through probably some of the busiest time of the year for both of us is when we were doing this podcast for the most part, and we were able to sustain it because we planned for it and we did the proper time management. And we're giving, after this season 1, we're going to give ourselves a little bit of hiatus, and hopefully by August, we'll be releasing season 2, and we're going to have a revigorated outline and everything, and kind of readdress some of our approach and what we've learned.
And that's probably a good thing to do is to create a planned break, figure out and do an assessment, do a, moratorium on what you did and what went well and what didn't go well and where you can make improvements. Now that we actually know what's involved, that is something that is very helpful.
So let's just talk about baseline what's involved. So obviously you need a microphone. You need a computer with recording software, right? What software do we use?
So I'll say this, the program that you went through, the course online, was called Stack Skills. What's it called?
That's the online course.
Stack Skills. That's the thing that John Michael did, kind of going through the ABCs of creating a podcast. So the equipment that you need, you can probably buy the whole entire set for less than $250 because that included the microphones.
And that's a nice set.
And that's a nice set. And we actually ended up buying a set that we actually are not even using today because that first set of microphones was so basic and we actually needed a better one. So today we're using Blue. It is the Yeti Blue microphone. It's a single microphone. It's very powerful and it has a lot of different options. It's a little bit more expensive, but I would actually say that's probably a good start, is to start with a very good microphone.
Yeah, the microphone counts. We thought going into it we had got some nice microphones, and if you guys are regular listeners, you'll notice there's a few episodes there where especially the life coach and the reviews one where the microphone was messed up. We didn't know that we recorded both those episodes on the same day. We didn't know at the time. Everything looked registered. It looked fine, but then later on we went back to listen and the microphones were messing up a little bit. So that's, and it had done it a little bit before prior. So we finally decided that was kind of we need to get a new microphone after those episodes.
So if anything, I would invest in a really good microphone. We used a free program called Audacity. If you are a PC person, use Audacity. If you are a Mac person, I believe their program is GarageBand. So those are 2 free programs on both sets of computers that you can use to initially record and edit your podcast.
Yeah, so we approached this, and initially the agreement was that I would kind of produce some of the content outline. I had the outline of the show and a lot of that work, and Mari was going to do a little bit more of the technical stuff and the editing. And we actually outsourced
part of the editing. So I will say to you that there's 2 things that are a major time suck when you set up a podcast. So the first part is just getting the podcast set up. So we went through those Stack Skills courses that John Michael signed up for, and it suggested using a program called Libsyn, which we did use, and that is where we host our podcasts. And it does a great job. There's a couple of gaps where they don't really tell you specifically how to set up so that your podcast streams to Google Play and to iTunes. You just sort of finish and figure it out. So that delayed our launch a little bit because I wasn't really sure. I had to do extra things through Google Play and through iTunes. And those were additional costs because they charge you also to have an account with them. So the Google Play account was a lot cheaper than the iTunes, but we did feel like we needed to be on both platforms. So the setup also included images that you need to have, that when somebody sees your podcast on a device, they see, an image and a description. So we spent time on the setup, setting it up through Google Play, iTunes, Libsyn, and also creating the images. And each platform required different sizes, different styles. So I had to have my graphic designer create all those. They have great spec sheets on Libsyn to tell you what is required. So we use those. So that was probably the bulk of the setup, was just in that part of it. Once it's set up, it's kind of runs on its own after that. But that very first one was the hardest, and that's what took the longest, because Google Play is a lot faster, I will tell you that. They approved and set up the podcast way faster than the iTunes. If you make a change and you need to refresh a podcast with maybe some text changes you want or a broken link, on Google Play it happens within an hour, and on iTunes it just takes longer. So that was probably the first part of the time suck, was the very beginning initial setup. The second part of the time suck that you need to plan for, other than the recording time, is after you record the podcast. So after you record it, you need to go through and edit out any extraneous noises, like John Michael's ums.
Or Mari, if you listen to the fraud episode very carefully, you get to hear Mari sipping on coffee in the background and typing on her computer.
So you do need a great space where you don't have any extraneous noises. You don't want to be near a window picking up traffic or cars. You want to turn your phones off, completely off, because even the vibrations pick up. So you really need to be in a very quiet place. But after the podcast is done, you kind of go through and you clean it up and you edit it. Now, if you know how to do this part yourself, great. If not, you outsource it, which is what I did, because I just didn't have time to learn how to add in the music. So we had an introductory music that also fades out at the end. We had an introduction and we had a disclaimer that would get attached to every episode. So we actually outsourced that part of it. After that comes back and your episode is ready, then you have to turn around and upload it to the Libsyn hosting or wherever you're hosting, and you have to add in your own descriptions. So you need to be prepared to understand what is the title, what is the description, so that anybody who's reviewing this online can see and maybe they'll be interested in it. We actually set up a website page that you could do through Libsyn, so we had to create those pages. Then you have to write out the descriptions on how it is posted on social media. So that takes a bit. And then you have to schedule it. So you go through this whole listing schedule platform on scheduling on the release dates, web player, on your social media. So all that can take about 30 minutes to an hour, depending on your episode or how many episodes you're uploading. Yes. That's the second part of the time suck.
Yeah, so obviously there's a lot of behind the scenes. And then on top of that, you got to schedule your episodes, schedule your content. If you're going to have guest speakers, you got to get them scheduled to come in. And it's nice because Mari and I, we were in this together. Admittedly, she had a lot more time involved when it came to the editing and stuff. That's why I tried to help out a little bit with more of the content and getting the guests and everything and doing what I could. If it was down to editing, I probably would have given up and just released a very unedited, terrible episode. So, kudos to Mari for having the wherewithal and the patience to do that. But every episode should have sort of 3 parts. We talked about the hard intro and the hard exit. We've mentioned that. And then the soft intro. You should have an outline. Every time you sit down and do an episode, you should have an outline of the soft intro, bringing the people in, and then you get into your content and what you're talking about. You have your outroll, which is, you want to make sure you thank people for listening. You want to tell them where to go. In our case, we say go to BAMM-IT.com, ask for the review, and you say what you're going to talk about in the next episode so that there can be that lead in. And there's a mid-roll. That's something that we haven't done and we're going to think about introducing in the next season. A mid-roll is a break in the middle of the podcast, which is kind of like a sponsorship break, kind of like that OTT that we were referencing, where it can be a hard pre-recorded cut in, or you could do it soft in the middle. But you should start thinking about, or some people should think about introducing that mid-roll. into the episode. But we were, I think, pretty good and consistent at keeping to that outline and having good content. We would talk about what to talk about and have, good meetings. And for the most part, one person would be responsible for the episode as far as the content's concerned. And it would allow the other person to sort of not know the topic so that they can be the one asking the questions and playing dumb. That's when it was just Mari and I. Obviously, if we had guests on, we both could kind of play that role of, the surrogate listener and ask the questions and interact with the guest. Otherwise, we do that with each other. So when we did the fraud episode, I was the one with the content and Maury was the one asking questions. When we did the OTT episode, Maury was the one with the content, and I was the one that didn't know what was going on, which is normal.
Well, that's an overview, I believe, of what's involved in setting up a podcast. I think that's a pretty good basic wrap-up of
and it's
creating a podcast. So if you're thinking about doing it yourself, I say go for it. It's really not that hard to get into it. But what I will say is have a partner. That partner is not only going to be helpful for you as far as the content, but it's an accountability as well. It's been a great accountability.
Yeah, and it helps break up the duties and the tasks. And it also, in some ways, in my opinion, may help with the episode. And whereas you're just not one person talking. So it wouldn't be a bad idea to look for, maybe more than one person to think about that if you're thinking about doing this. So what are some other things we've learned? Just going through these. Well,
let's talk about our bloopers. So
you know how we've had a few of those.
We've had a few bloopers.
That didn't make the cutting board, that's for sure. Well, the very first 3 episodes, introductions, networking, and the new tax law, those 3 we recorded. It was before our space here that we're at now was ready. So we wanted to get these recorded because we had a launch date. We launched with 5 episodes and we needed to start recording. So we recorded it in Mari's kitchen. It was funny because I think it was during the networking episode, Mari's cat was walking around. You could actually hear the cat bell in the background because the cat kept trying to get in Mari's face and sit in her lap. And then her back, we were in the kitchen and her back was to this food and she was marinating a chicken in the background. And I'm facing Mari and she's talking and it's one of our first episodes. So, we're kind of fresh-faced at this and I didn't want to interrupt her or mess up the podcast. And the cat's like just behind Mari, just eating this chicken that she's got marinating. And I didn't want to...
I had a raw whole chicken that was sitting in the background. I thought, well, since we're going to do this podcast at my house, I might as well be able to get this chicken started later on for dinner. So there is this chicken sitting on my counter. And after the podcast is done, John Michael's like, oh, by the way, your cat was in the background chomping on your raw chicken.
I was trying not to laugh. I didn't want to interrupt her because, but that was...
So that was our very first blooper, was the very first 3 episodes recorded in my kitchen with my cat. So maybe we should make the cat a guest sometime.
Yeah, we probably should. That's the episode, and I was coming over, and Mari was like, I'll make you coffee, and I stuck my foot in the mouth by asking her what kind of coffee it was, and Which
actually is what led to our off-topic segment. Correct. And where you got to really go into your coffee.
Yeah.
Next time, I think you should do an off-topic on beer.
Okay. Home brewing
Craft beer,
or just
home
beer.
brewing.
Just all about beer. Maybe.
Home brewing.
It may be interesting. Another something funny I learned is I made a comment on the Outsourcing Social Media podcast. I made a side comment that it would be, that's why my mother-in-law has a Facebook page. It must be so easy. Even my mother-in-law can do it. Evidently, I realized very soon after that podcast aired that my mother-in-law is a listener because she had called me or texted me or something talking about how she's actually very savvy at the internet, probably admittedly way more savvy than me. And she took umbrage to the fact that I would say, well, even my mother-in-law has a Facebook page. And my point being is
especially when you don't have a Facebook page.
Correct. I know it was very arrogant of me. And But my point
so be
being,
careful when you talk about family
is
on a podcast.
be aware you're on a podcast and it's being published, and you talk to people, but I think it's funny, so I'll talk about my mother-in-law, hopefully in positive terms. If she's listening to this, I love my mother-in-law to death. She's fantastic.
Maybe we should have her on the podcast because there are certain celebrities out there. Their parents are equally as a part of their celebrity status. Are you a celebrity yet?
Only in one person's mind am I a celebrity, and that would be, I think, my own. But that was kind of a funny thing. My kids get a kick out of it. I remember the very first time they listened to my podcast, the hard intro came on, and it said with John, Michael, and Mari. I remember my son going, "Wow!" like it's something special. Which it's fun, it's neat. But a lot of times with our interesting topics, I will admit that we're about to hit record. We're like, okay, do we have our interesting topic? We're like, oh no. So we pull Google out about 10 seconds before we hit record and just find an interesting topic. But every single time it has worked, and it allows us to kind of naturally be a little, curious as to those topics. And I like doing the interesting facts because it does do just kind of a natural conversational lead. And I say it gets you talking. That's what doing this, it gets you talking. So you just don't kind of just jump into a topic. We had a few episodes, coffee was one of them, where we had to totally replace like the first 10 minutes because we did have a microphone malfunction. And we realized it the day we recorded at the end that like for the first 10 minutes of the coffee episode, it didn't catch up my microphone. It just caught Mari's. So we had to kind of recreate the first 10 minutes of that episode from memory, sort of, and it ended up being fine, and it was seamless, but that was a blooper moment.
I think when you do these, don't go into it with the idea that there's going to be perfection. Although it's not live, there's still going to be a lot that you just don't account for.
Yeah. I mean, like we had that situation with the life coach episode, which I think was a fantastic episode, where we did have a microphone malfunction. And frankly, we were kind of just like, oh, the content was so good. We didn't want to have to reschedule or just not air the episode. So we had to make that decision just to air those episodes with the messed up microphone, which we were aware of, and it was not so bad that we couldn't just air them. But it just goes to show of trying to get your equipment in line, make sure it's working, and being aware of that stuff, and being aware of what you're saying. I know everybody out there has had those moments where they're, they call them shower thoughts, where you're like, when I'm having that conversation with somebody, you're like, oh, I wish I would have said this, or, if I would have just said that, it would have made so much more sense. Well, that is exponential when you do a podcast. So often I'll re-listen to my podcasts and say, what I just said there didn't make sense, or man, if I would have just said that, or it makes you second guess sometimes some of the things you say.
That's funny. I don't ever listen to them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, or sometimes, and I've noticed, like I noticed once or twice, I'll just say something that, you don't, just a little vague, or maybe, I don't want to say not true, but I mean, like the new tax law, I think I said something that maybe wasn't,
Don't tell on yourself.
No, I wasn't.
You know what? My husband always asks, he says to me, why are you always right? And I tell him, because I don't ever tell you when I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So, in this case, don't tell the world when you've said something.
No, I don't. Wrong. I mean, I didn't say anything wrong, but it just causes you to like have those moments of introspection, and especially when you're out here talking about, tax laws and stuff. Very minor things, but there's a level of insecurity there. So it comes down to being properly prepared, or attempting to be properly repaired. There was
properly repaired or prepared.
Prepared. There was one episode we recorded, I forget which one it was, and forgive me for this, Mari, where Mari was like deathly sick the night before. And which one was that?
I don't remember.
Yeah, but she had like the flu the night before, and God bless her. She like at the end of the episode, she's telling me about how she had just been deathly sick the night before and all this, and I'm just like, well, what are you doing here?
I was just passing it on.
Just not feeling good, and just had a horrible day, and
But that's what I mean by, I think, having accountability, because if you are left to doing this yourself, I think I can see clearly how by episode 7 you're just like not being consistent anymore and you just sort of check out because it's a lot of work. So you really do need to have somebody share that burden with you or outsource it. You can do a lot of that. There's a lot more businesses popping up that are providing podcast services, including podcast recording studios. So maybe explore that if you have that kind of budget. John Michael and I approach this from the perspective of many small business owners, which is we want to create a podcast, but we don't want to spend a fortune doing that. And we wanted to see what we thought of it, do one and then see if we want to continue. Do we want to invest? We have not done any advertising, and we've had over 800 downloads, which I say that's pretty good.
That's very good. I mean, for just word of mouth and we did some email pushes to clients.
Exactly, but we haven't paid for any advertising. We haven't gone after any sponsors. So that is going to be our question for season 2. We want to make sure that, I know we want to improve upon what we're doing. So I'm sure that we will probably make some changes, maybe outsource a little bit more of this so that it's not such a time suck administratively, and then possibly think about sponsorships and advertising.
Mm-hmm. Well, at the end, that's where it can go. And if we get sponsors, we get funds, and we could just kind of put that back into... So
hint, if you're thinking about sponsoring us, contact us.
Yeah, contact us or negotiate sponsorship terms. Overall, it's been a great and enjoyable experience.
I think you need to allow on a weekly basis if you're going to do this, about an hour to 2 hours a week, if you're going to do a regular podcast. And it also depends on your podcast schedule. I think there are some podcasts that don't release but one every couple of weeks. There are some podcasts that release something every day.
Mm-hmm.
So it also depends on the frequency of your podcast schedule will dictate how much time you're going to spend on it.
And the length of the podcast. So we came in, we said our podcast will be between 30, 45 minutes. And for the most part, we were pretty spot on most of those. Some podcasts could be daily and they're 10-minute just snippets. Some of that is advertising. If you get up an advertising base, then some people, they're like, for every listen that's how you get paid. So if you're starting to get listeners and paid, some people say, well, I'm going to do shorter podcasts and do it once a day, so I get paid that much more as opposed to longer episodes. So some of that is economic driven. I don't think... I
believe it's what your goals are. Our goals were not monetary to begin with.
Not at all. Our goals were informational and entertainment, and hopefully we accomplished that. Hopefully the content's good. We would love feedback, emails. You can go to BAMM-IT.com and you can contact Maury and I from any of that. But any other bloopers or stories from the days, I think we covered most of it. No big bloopers, nothing major. There was one episode where we were just laughing at each other, and that's probably every episode.
I'm always laughing at you, but you know.
The OTT episode, I think, is probably the last one we recorded, which was earlier today, was probably the one where we ran off the rails.
Yeah, we kind of went off track a little bit there.
We went off the rails the most on that one.
So I believe that wraps up, to me, this wrap-up season of season 1 of BAMM-IT. And by the way, how did we come up with that name?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been asked that, and I say it was not even a 30-minute conversation between Maury and I.
It really wasn't.
I was like, hey, let's do a podcast, and then the next time we talked, Maury was like, how about BAM, Business Accounting, Marketing, and Management? And I was like, I don't know. She was like, well, BAMM-IT, Business Accounting, Marketing, Management, IT. I said, okay, sounds good. And I think that surmises. It was totally Maury giving the idea and me saying, okay.
Yeah, we just went with it. We really didn't spend a lot of time thinking about the name. I don't know that we'll change it. I sort of like it. It's easy.
I like it. I don't think at this point we're going to change it. We've already got the semi-brand going. And I just think it's just the first time I heard it, I said, okay, sounds, no.
I think another future thing that we might consider are some live episodes. We've been wanting to do that. We've had invitations to do some live podcasting, but we just don't know anything about that aspect of it yet. So that may be phase 2 or season 2.
Yeah, because we've been invited to interview some restaurateurs in their restaurant.
There's also podcast festivals. So John Michael, there was one, I think, coming up in Tennessee.
Yeah.
And so perhaps in the future we might expand our own education by maybe going to one of these podcast festivals. I have no idea what that would even look like. I mean, I'm thinking, is this like a headbanger thing?
No.
Is this
it's
a
just,
Comic-Con?
other podcasters.
Do you dress up like your favorite podcaster at like a Comic-Con thing, or is this like what is this? An EDM concert?
No, it's just it's about podcasting. Probably, hardware vendors will be there, but also other podcasters do live podcasts from there. And if you're more famous podcasters than you and I,
maybe we need to bring one to Asheville. I think Asheville ought to have their own podcast festival.
Maybe we should do a podcast festival. Let's do it.
Hey,
you guys, you're seeing the foundations of
this is how we come up with terrible ideas.
The BAMM-IT Podcast Festival in Asheville.
This is how we come up with these ideas that later on we say, what were we thinking?
And we make a podcast and complain about how much dang work it was. Let's do a podcast episode. I think we should. I mean, a festival, yeah.
So thank you for joining us today, and we will see you again, or we will talk to you again in the future sometime in August with season 2 of BAMM-IT. Please review any of our previous episodes, and for more information you can visit BAMM-IT.com, BAMM-IT.com.
It's been fun, and we'll see you next season.
The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast should not be considered professional advice and is for entertainment purposes only. The hosts and guests of this podcast may make terrible attempts at being funny, and this podcast does not defend the merits of this humor, nor does it guarantee that the humor will be successful. It is not guaranteed that you will find this as entertaining as the hosts find themselves.